Hey heroes, welcome to another spectacular episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, you can sign up for $1 per month over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. For this week's video, we're taking a look at another selection of strange stories from before the Marvel Age of Heroes. You see, dear viewer, while costume superheroes first rose to prominence in the 1940s, there was a period of time between World War II and the debut of the Fantastic Four in which such things were uncommon. However, in the shadows of society, the world remained a strange and fantastical place, as we shall now demonstrate. Our first tale of the day is called The Secret of the Haunted Room. This story begins on October 9th, 1945, at a Hungarian inn where an American writer named Norman Raine decided to stay. Raine was working on a book about ghost sightings in Europe and had heard that the inn had a haunted room. The owner of the inn, a man named Varno Kaderek, explained that anyone who stayed in that room died during the night, and so he'd kept it locked for the past 2 years. Raine insisted on staying in the room, and while Varno was hesitant, his wife Sonia convinced him to let Raine stay there. And sure enough, the following morning, Varno Kaderek found Norman Raine dead in the room. Not wasting any time, Kaderek quickly contacted the police and told them what happened. However, because the roads were washed out by a storm, it would take the authorities several hours to arrive. In the meantime, Kaderek found Raine's notes detailing his experiences during the night. At the request of the officer he spoke with on the telephone, Kaderek began reading the notes, and here is what they said. Despite being on the second floor at roughly 10 o'clock, Raine thought he saw a massive wolf just outside the window. It attempted to break in, but the metal bars prevented it, and the wolf took off. Curious, Raine peered outside into the storm and thought that he saw the beast transform into a woman. An hour passed without incident, but then Raine saw a man at the front door seeking refuge from the weather. Raine went downstairs to let him in, but as he opened the door he noticed lupine features and realized the man was transforming into a werewolf. Acting quickly, Raine slammed the door shut and turned the wolf man away. Of course, both Kaderek and the police officer he spoke with found these written words hard to believe. The officer then asked Kaderek not to touch anything but to look at the scene and see if anything seemed amiss. And strangely, the innkeeper noticed thick gray hairs which could very well have come from a wolf clinging to Raine's fingers. To make the whole situation even worse, the police who were on the way found the roads even more treacherous than anticipated, and would have to travel the last 10 miles on foot. In the meantime, Kaderek returned to reading Raine's notes to see what else was written. According to them, midnight arrived and Raine was determined to stay awake, waiting for sunrise. Apparently nothing else happened until 4 a.m. when he heard a tapping at the window. It was Kaderek's wife, Sonia, who had thrown pebbles at the window to get his attention after accidentally locking herself outside. According to Varno Kaderek, Sonia often went out early to do chores, so this didn't stick out as unusual to him. However, the way the notes continued before suddenly being cut off concerned him. You see, it was that morning that Varno Kaderek learned that his own wife was the werewolf. He didn't want to believe it, of course, even as the officer on the line pleaded with him to flee, and Sonia Kaderek claimed yet another victim. Our next suspenseful story is called A Night in Hangman's House. This tale begins, as they often do, with an unsuspecting couple on a dark and stormy night. After taking a wrong turn, Duncan and Laura drove down a winding New England road searching for a rest stop. Eventually, they came upon an old farmhouse and decided to investigate. After knocking on the door for several minutes, they were greeted by the elderly caretaker of the property. Since there was nothing else around for miles, the old man let them inside and offered to allow them to stay the night. He led them to the library, where above the burning fireplace hung a picture of the house's original owner, Peter the Hangman. The caretaker told the couple that Peter Van Cleek was an executioner in the 1860s who took morose glee in his work. There were many stories about this gruesome man, the most famous of which involved the last man ever hanged by Peter. Will Wagenford, a man convicted of horse theft, was set to be executed at noon, but Peter was already preparing the noose that morning. Well before the scheduled time, Will's brother arrived with a pardon from the governor, but Peter would not be denied his satisfaction. Pretending not to hear, Peter's rope claimed another victim, and the surviving Wagenford swore revenge. Not long after that, the hangman disappeared, with some saying that he was killed by the ghost of Will Wagenford. And after hearing the story, Duncan noticed the end of a rope hanging from the chimney. The caretaker insisted they not touch it, as it had been there for years and there was no point in cutting it. The old man then brought the young couple upstairs to rooms they could spend the night in. Each had a bed that was large enough for one person, but each person could have a room to themselves. But then, in the middle of the night, Duncan heard a blood-curdling scream from one of the other rooms. Leaping to his feet, he rushed out to investigate and found a long rope wriggling in the hallway as if it were alive. Stranger still, the end of the rope was tied into a noose and had strangled the old caretaker. Laura awakened as well, and Duncan quickly brought her downstairs away from the grisly scene. There, they found the rope extending out of the chimney while Duncan explained what he saw. Grabbing a nearby axe, he began hacking away at the rope, chopping it into little pieces. The couple, of course, wanted to leave the house at this point, but the storm outside had gotten so bad they were all but forced to stay the night. It seems the caretaker was right when he said it was useless to cut the rope, for soon it extended from the chimney and attacked again. Duncan saved Laura from the rope and continued to chop it into pieces once more. This time, he decided to go to the source of the problem by smashing the fireplace that it came from. But when he did, from the old bricks fell the decayed remains, we can only presume, of Peter the Hangman. Next, let's step away from hauntings and tell the tale of the Man Who Wasn't There. The star of this story is a carnival barker named Eddie Wallace, who was good at attracting crowds. But one person who wasn't very popular at his fair was a mystic named Abdul Kasha. He decided to pack up his things and move on, but Eddie wanted to bid him farewell and mock him one last time. Abdul, in turn, left Eddie a going-away present to demonstrate the truth of his powers: 2 bottles of pills. One, he explained, would reduce a man to the size of a doll, while the other would return him to normal. Eddie brought the bottles home and contemplated trying the pills. Meanwhile, the landlady's cat had entered his apartment once again and tried to rub against his leg. Eddie, however, had no patience for the animal and kicked it aside. After the cat was driven off, Eddie tried one of the shrinking pills, and sure enough, it worked. Suspecting he could do whatever he wanted without being noticed, he started to come up with a plan. Sneaking into a jewelry store through the mail slot after hours, he quickly grabbed whatever he could carry and returned home with his loot. Taking one of the other pills to return to normal size, Eddie decided that this haul was only the beginning. After finding an underground contact to fence the goods, he quit his carnival job and continued his crime spree. Finally, he planned to steal an expensive gemstone from a rich old man. What's worse is that he murdered the old man with his own gun before escaping with the gem. He reached his home, but before returning to normal size, there was a knock at the door and Eddie hid. As it turns out, the police had arrested the underworld fence, who figured Eddie as the one bringing him the stolen gems. And so after the landlady let them in, they decided to wait around for their target to return. Eddie, meanwhile, attempted to escape out the window, but was soon caught by the landlady's cat, who had entered the apartment again. As the cat ran off, one of the waiting officers thought he saw something strange in the animal's mouth, but his partner assured him it was certainly just a mouse. Our next strange and marvelous tale is called The Man Who Died Twice. This story starts with a man named Larry Adams and his friend and co-worker Willie. Willie was a strong believer in fate, that each man's destiny was set from the day they were born, but Larry thought the idea was ridiculous. One day while discussing the topic, the two were approached by a tall, thin man wearing a black coat and hat. He said that he agreed with Willie's assessment that fate played a large part in people's lives. After that, the man in black quietly slipped away and seemingly disappeared. The two friends didn't pay him much mind and went to get a drink together. But at the bar, they noticed the man in black through his reflection in a mirror. Larry went to chastise him for following them, but when he turned around, the strange man was gone, and the word fate was inscribed on the table where he sat. After that, Larry returned home, where his wife Alice told him that earlier that day a thin man in black had come by looking for him, and she remarked that he seemed to know Willie. Larry then assumed that the whole thing was part of some prank that Willie was playing, which didn't seem to surprise Alice at all. But the next day at the office, Willie saw the stranger outside and started to grow more afraid of him. Getting the sense that his friend was sincere, Larry went out to confront the man. But as he approached, he was overcome with dizziness and the man in black disappeared, leaving the word fate scrawled on the pole behind him. Larry did his best to go about his workday, and that evening he scheduled a business trip to Chicago. Larry was used to such things, and so he booked a flight for the following morning, and Alice saw him off at the airport at around 9 a.m. But as the plane took off at 9:20, he saw that the man in black was also on the flight. And shortly after that, something went wrong as the plane's engine caught fire. The craft started going down, and it didn't seem likely that anyone on board would survive. But as they fell out of the sky, the man in black told Larry that he could give him another chance to live. The next thing he knew, Larry was waking up in his bed at home while Alice was making breakfast. She told him it was only 7 in the morning, and so he still had time to get to the airport. Larry believed that what he thought had happened was actually a dream, but not just any dream, a premonition. He decided to cancel his flight and drive to Chicago instead, while this time Willie was the one dubious about what he was claiming. The two men placed a friendly wager of $10 each over whether or not the plane would actually crash. They gave their bets to Alice, and Larry told her that when he won, she should keep the money, although she was uncomfortable about the idea that winning meant people had died. Ultimately, Larry also decided that doing the right thing was more important than winning the bet, and so as he drove past the airport, he stopped to try and warn the pilots about what would happen. While his warnings went unheeded and he was assured that everything had already been checked, he noticed the man in black boarding the plane. With nothing left he could do, Larry continued his drive, content that he escaped his fate, if there even was such a thing. But then he saw it, the plane coming down out of the sky right towards him. He tried to swerve out of the way, but was ultimately crushed by the flaming wreckage. He passed away from his injuries, and with his final words, Larry Adams admitted that Willie was right about fate. Sometime later, his grave was visited by the Man in Black, who remarked that, of course, there was no escape from destiny once it was written, for he was the one who wrote it. Our fifth and final shocking tale for the day is called A Witch is Among Us. This story begins in a small town where people were still afraid of witches, and perhaps with good reason. One stormy night, a woman named Faith Bonham was contacted by her neighbor Prudence and warned that a baby from the village had gone missing. It was that same night that a doctor named Jonathan Poole arrived at Bonham's home to rent one of her rooms. Poole mentioned that there was quite a commotion in the village, and Bonham explained. She told him how yet another baby had disappeared, taken by the witch. Soon after that, the two heard a scream from outside, and Poole rushed out to investigate. He found a young woman named Rosa who begged him to help her. Rosa's grandmother had been accused of being a witch, and the villagers were out for blood. He followed her in an attempt to help, but it was too late as her house and her grandmother were both gone. Bonham, meanwhile, didn't trust Rosa, claiming the girl was likely a witch as well. Poole, however, insisted on bringing Rosa back to the house and giving her a sedative. The following day, Poole and Bonham accompanied Rosa to visit her grandmother's grave. However, the old woman's resting place was simply marked with a stone that read, "Here lies a witch." Poole thought it was madness that such a thing could still happen in the 20th century. But Bonham proclaimed that he would learn soon enough, and that witches would always steal the lives of newborn children to prolong their own. After that, Poole convinced Bonham to let Rosa stay with them, and the girl soon befriended Bonham's black cat. Time passed, Bonham avoided Rosa, and Poole spent many late nights alone working on his papers. Then, 2 months later, Bonham and the other women of the village gathered at the Harris household to celebrate their new baby being born. However, the momentous occasion was soon interrupted when the cries of the newborn were followed by a terrified scream. The women rushed in to investigate, and the town doctor declared that the baby had been taken by a large black creature. Bonham suspected that Rosa was the witch responsible, and it didn't take long for an angry mob to gather. The old woman searched her house for the girl, but found no sign of her. But then she realized that she hadn't seen Poole either, and feared that Rosa had killed him too. She rushed upstairs, burst into his room, and that's where she saw a terrifying sight. It was Dr. Jonathan Poole who was preparing to sacrifice the Harris baby. Fortunately, the woman was able to prevent this grisly act, seizing the child and running from the true witch. Furthermore, with the sacrifice interrupted, Poole's power quickly waned. Before long, the man disintegrated in the moonlight, leaving behind only a dusty pile of bones and a pair of spectacles. Bonham found Rosa bound and gagged, but alive, in Poole's closet, and after that the village lived in peace. However, on some nights, when the wind whistles through the trees, it's been said that if you listen closely, you can still hear the witch's final scream echoing through the dark. And that's all I've got for you this week. I hope you enjoyed this selection of strange stories. If so, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me, including my Patreon page, where for only $1 a month you can get your name in these special thanks here. So until next time, true believers, Excelsior!